and welcome. My name is Karen Kiefer, and I'm the director of the Church in the 21st Century Center. And thanks so much for coming out tonight. When you entered the room, you probably received a blank card. It's an opportunity for you to write a question that we might get a chance to read later in the evening. We're going to pick the cards up on the side aisles at 7:45. So you'll see our team kind of go down the side aisles. Just pass the card with the question over to our teammates, okay? So that's happening at 7:45. Another housekeeping note. You can follow us on Twitter at hashtag BC Revitalize, okay? Many of you look so familiar, and you've been to so many of our events over the years, and you know that the Church in the 21st Century Center's mission is to be a catalyst and a resource for the renewal of our Catholic Church. And we have been so happy to be doing that work for the last 17 years. When we had discussions about the kind of programming that we wanted to put forward after August in our summer and the turmoil in our church, we were very intentional. We thought, how can we put together some beautiful minds and some wisdom and offer some ideas that can actually help revitalize our church, and then wrap those conversations in the hope of Easter. So we intentionally decided to create an Easter series. And the series itself is a combination of 4 programs. The first program, some of you I know attended just a few weeks ago, Revitalizing Our Church, Ideas from the Catholic Press. We had the great pleasure of having our Associate Vice President for University Communications, Jack Dunn, interview Vatican analyst and the editor of Crux, John Allen, and also Father Matt Malone, who is in charge of America Media. They came together and have a conversation with Jack on ways that we can revitalize the church. They were terrific. If you weren't able to attend the event, please go on our website, bc.edu/C21, say that quickly, and you can really enjoy the video and listen to it. John Allen is so prolific, and he's writing all the time. And yesterday he put out an article, and he mentioned his experience here a couple of weeks ago. And he writes, while I was at Boston College, I reconnected with the Church in the 21st Century Center, an initiative launched in 2002 that's become one of the country's premier forums for smart conversations about the church. I took part in an event hosted by Jack Dunn, university spokesman and vice president, featuring myself and Jesuit Father Matt Malone, editor of America. Along the way, Dunn quoted from a 2008 piece by Malone on why he remains a priest after the latest wave of abuse scandals that broke over the summer. Father Malone responded, "This summer reminded me of something my father, a retired firefighter, said to me after the 9/11 attacks. Those firefighters who died in New York, Dad said, died running into the building. When there's a fire, Maddie, and lives are at stake, somebody has to run into the building. I remain a priest because somebody has to run into the building." John Allen continued, "Over and over, I've been struck by how many American Catholics still seem willing to run into the building." Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
Tonight is our second program in the Easter series. It's Ideas from University Presidents. We are so excited to engage in this conversation with Father Leahy, who he's the 25th president of Boston College and has been really leading the way here for 23 years. We also have Sister Janet Eisner, who has been the president of Emmanuel College for 40 years.
Yikes.
And is the longest sitting president.
Right. You were 2?
Female president.
Huh? You were 2? No. When you started, you were 2 years old?
And we also have Father Joseph McShane, president of Fordham University, and he has been president there for 16 years. But before he was president there, he was also president at University of Scranton for 5. So if somebody do the math, it's like collectively 80, something years worth of leadership. So we're honored and grateful that they're here. Before we begin our conversation, I just was reminded of celebrating, all of us, the Feast of the Annunciation on Monday. And Mary saying yes when she really didn't know what was ahead. And isn't that what faith is all about? Isn't that why we're here? And so before we begin, could I ask you to all stand and recite the Hail Mary for ourselves, for each other, and for our church. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Thank you. I'm switching seats. Father Leahy, Sister Janet, Father McShane, thank you so much for being here. So we're going to start off. And the first question is, you've each been involved in the Catholic Church for years. What words or phrases or thoughts would you use to describe Catholicism, the state of Catholicism, and the Catholic community in the United States? And I'm going to lead with Sister Janet.
Thank you. 2 words come to mind. 2 phrases, you said phrases too, come to mind. One is, clearly we recognize we're in a crisis. But the words that come to my mind are ever-changing, ever God with us. Now, I'm cheating a little because that's the theme of our centennial. Ever-changing, ever Emmanuel. The second phrase is really coming from something that Father Brian here has spoken of so many times. The church in America is at the center and the edge. And the church is at the center because of so many graduates of Fordham, Boston College, Emmanuel, and other places where Catholics have a major impact, certainly involved in business and in so many other ways. And if you think of your graduates, you realize just how central and how significant so many have contributed as Catholics to American society. It is also a church at the edge, and I can think of no better place to look than at the southern border of our country. And I've been in touch today and in the past with a number of Sisters of Notre Dame who are down there, and they are people who have spent 30, 40 years in Brazil, have now, quote, retired, and they're at the in McAllen, Texas, working with the migrants as they come for the border. And this morning they told me that over 700 migrants, that means children as well, came into the country. They came to this respite that they operate under the auspices of Catholic Charities.
You have to move. Stand up, right? Do you have to
Go right ahead.
move?
Yeah.
Keep on.
I will.
Well, I guess we can keep talking.
We can keep talking, yes. I want to tell you about McAllen, Texas. So, in this experience, over 700 came through. They have a chance for a day or two where they get clothes. They have a chance for a short time. They're given food. A number of these are children coming across, and these people receive a ticket to a bus ride to a place that they can find a sponsor, and that may be in Philadelphia, in Boston, or New York. Then they have another ticket that gives them the date that they have to go before ICE. Now, this is what's happening on our southern border. It is also the church at the edge there, and it is the church certainly in our own archdiocese where there are, I think, Mass is celebrated in 26 languages in a given week. So to me, that is the American church, the center and the edge. Right.
Sister Janet, where there is darkness, there is also light.
Yes. Thank you.
Father McShane?
Thank you. You just stole one of my lines, actually. I would say, for me, the best description I have of the American church at the present time is the American church is once again a missionary church, but doesn't realize it. Yeah. Why do I say that? I think that right now, like Paul in Athens, the church is confronting a culture that it does not understand and for whom it's not calling the shots. And we have to engage at the present time a culture which is natively digital, very much at home in cyber in all its forms, an age and a culture which describes itself as spiritual but not religious, hungry and not satisfied, not sure where to turn, but knowing that they're in some darkness and looking for light. I noticed everyone was looking for light a few moments ago, and everyone was heading in that direction. So I think that the American church right now has once again been returned to the status of a mission church in missionary territory, which creates for it tremendous challenges. And the first challenge would be the challenge to admit that we are in mission country. The second is to learn the language of the nation or the country or the culture in which we find ourselves so that we can, as Paul did, make some connection. As he said to the Athenians, I see that you are a very religious people. You have altars to all the gods. You even have an altar to the unknown God. So I think we have to learn how to engage a culture which is post-Christian and therefore missionary and say to it, you say that you are spiritual but not religious. Let me tell you about what your spirit is being drawn to, and you don't know its name or his name or her name. So I think we have to learn the language, and we have to become bilingual. And also, frankly, we can learn from our own missionary past how to engage a culture which is multifaceted, multi-ethnic. That was our identity as a national church. We didn't have a national church. We had many national churches. So I think we can learn from our own past. But we are missionary, and we're at a Paul in Athens moment, I think.
Going back to move forward,
Well, yeah, but also being brave enough to admit we are, to be honest with you, and somewhat, we have to be honest and with apostolic honesty say we're somewhat clueless in how best to confront, engage a culture which is foreign to us and which finds what we say. Our God talk is foreign language. We have to learn the language. You have to be bilingual. And the last thing, and this is what St. Ignatius would say, we have to be discerning enough to know when to present the Lord and when to get out of the way so that we don't stand in the way of people's encountering the Lord once they learn the language which would enable them to touch the unknown God that seeks them and that they feel hungry for but they don't know how to address. So that's a little philosophical, but I noticed that Father Madigan was here, so I wanted to be a little philosophical.
Chime in. Father Leahy?
There you go.
I would say, first of all, I think the church in the United States and really around the world is wounded and in too much disarray. And a lot of that is the aftermath of the sexual abuse crisis. How are we going to move forward? And that's where I think we're still very much struggling. But with that set of conditions, I would say the roots of the church and a sense of faith still does exist. Smaller, the practice is very much different. But I certainly find here students have faith and alumni have faith. It's expressed differently. And so I think the huge challenge for the church is how does it move forward in the midst of major issues that are there, have to be acknowledged, but I want to move forward. I don't want to stay caught up. I don't want to forget the past, especially the aftermath of sexual abuse, but I want to move forward. And I think there are a lot of people want to move forward. It's how to move forward.
Right. So speaking of how, can I stay with you for the next question? So the next question is, what advice do you as longtime presidents of Catholic colleges and universities have for Catholics, especially the hierarchy, about revitalizing our church?
Well, I'll start that, and I'll draw from my experience in Catholic higher education. I think we have to address the governance problem in the church. And if there's one lesson from Catholic higher education, it is moving to boards of trustees that have laymen and women on them with individuals who were part of the founding religious community or diocese, but having boards of trustees that are involved in the operation of archdioceses or dioceses with reserve powers in terms of matters of faith and teachings, core teachings of the church. But everything else, I would say, should function just as the Board of Trustees of our institutions does. Finance, construction, facilities, budget. That is done through a Board of Trustees. I think it would be huge. Second thing, that if I were giving advice to a group of bishops, if you were all bishops out there, I would say one of the great strengths of Catholic higher ed has been it engages in assessment and planning. And we now need, I think, a major initiative to ask our parishioners, the people of God, what do they see in the church? What do we need to fix? What's working well? So assess. And then I think we need to ask, how do we move forward? So we'd have the listening sessions, but then we'd get down to strategic choices. And that's that strategic planning that I think is absolutely critical. So let me stop with those two. I have one more I want to bring up at some point.
I would like to just follow up on what Father Leahy suggested, and that is, if you think of the model of boards of trustees, they're made up of laity, and I think one of the strongest messages that we need to get to the hierarchy of the church is that the deposit of faith, going back to John Henry Newman, is in fact with the consensus fidelium. The sense is deposit of faith is with the faithful. It is not only with the hierarchy. So I think a realization of the role of laity is critical for governance and also for engagement in mission. And I, of course, would want to say something very special to the hierarchy about the role of women in the church. And it seems to me that anytime there's an opportunity to engage women in key roles in the church, that has to happen, and that has to happen. One story that I remember is that Cardinal Swainens from Belgium, when he went to the beginning of Vatican II, it was 2 days before, he was the moderator of Vatican II, so this is 1963. And what did he say when he entered the room with all of the cardinals? He said, "Where is the other half of the population?" Now, this is 1963. That question hasn't been addressed yet in many ways in the church. So I think that's essential. I think the opportunity to appoint women as responsible for parishes, while that happens in some places in the Midwest, there are a couple of recent examples of that in Connecticut with the appointment of women to deal with the churches. But I think in higher education, we have the responsibility to help educate the laity, but also to make certain that we have prepared women for our roles in ministry, and then that somebody pays attention to it. And we were talking earlier about the role of women religious in this country in terms of building the educational system and part of the healthcare system as well. And it seems to me that is a great gift to the church, and it needs to continue. And I can't say enough how important it is if there is a seat at the table. There need to be women present. And I often comment that some of the difficulties we're dealing with right now may have been alleviated had there been women's voices heard earlier in the church. So that's my message over and over. Not what I'd like to say, it's what I do say to the hierarchy.
Now, I just want to do a gentle corrective. You know, in our conversation at dinner, what I think we all agreed on was this. It's a more bold statement than you were humbly, stating. And I would say it, therefore. The church, the American church, really was the creation of American religious women. It was what we would call in history, the empire of charity was created by religious women in the United States, whether it's the schools, the academy, the schools which were very, very different. You had the academies, which were owned and operated by the congregations. You had the diocesan schools, you had the parish schools, you had nursing schools, you had colleges and universities. That's that. Then you had orphanages, you had hospitals, you had just about every aspect of Catholic life was, I would say, enriched by religious women. When I think back, and Bill, I suspect even though we're half a continent away from one another in our upbringing, we were prepared for our sacraments by religious women. I was prepared by the Religious of Jesus and Mary, and I would suspect you were IHM.
Cincinnati Dominicans.
So just a gentle correction.
Yeah, many of us were.
Huh?
I said many of us were.
Right, and so I think the contribution that has been made should be the basis upon which the invitation to contributing now is extended. Those of us, and I think we all do have a sense of history. To be Catholic is to have a sense of history. We should be able to work that out. So you're being too humble. I know, and that's a Notre Dame trait. It is not a Jesuit trait. I just want to admit that, all right?
No, I know.
As you know, a humble Jesuit is an oxymoron. But I want to go back
at Boston College.
Except at Boston College. We're not going there. I don't work there.
He's a graduate, by the way.
Twice over. But I want to go back to what both of you have said. I think the first thing that we have to do for and with the hierarchy is I think we have to invite them to conversation.
Right.
And I think, Bill, you're very clear about this. This is one of the great things about the church in the 21st century. It's about dialogue and discussion. No one has the whole truth. But if we sat down with the hierarchy, and I want to think of the hierarchy more broadly conceived than just the bishops. I'm talking about men and women of power and influence and wisdom in the church, and sit down and engage in a very honest and humble dialogue where we would say to the bishops and others, what is it that you want from us? What is it that we can give you? And then we have to listen to the bishops tell us, what it is that they want, what do they need? And I think the bishops would say we need people to lead us in the art of discernment so we can face up to the problems but move forward. We need people who will help us to develop curricula for the schools and also the pastoral curricula for the parishes. So I think dialogue and conversation is the basis upon which we have to kind of develop our way of proceeding into the future. But that's going to be hard because there are terrible moments. This is terrible. There are terrible moments where you're at meetings with bishops and college presidents who are very humble say Catholic colleges and universities are where the church does its thinking.
Yeah.
Yikes! And the bishop says, well, I do this, I do that. We have to be humble enough not to pull out full battle array. But rather get to the table with the humility and the understanding that we're working together to serve the people of God, the church, and to help the church go forward. So I'm just listening to the two of you. It's really dialogue. Bill?
And I think it's right on target that we have to be inviting to members of the hierarchy, but they're divided in many instances, and it's hard for them to figure out how to move forward. We can talk and talk and talk, but we need action. We've got to have some definite programs, initiatives, because if we don't, we're like a patient bleeding, and we lose life the longer we delay. So I think there's an urgency, and I think the big challenge is moving forward as a church, and that means everybody's got to be involved. The bishops have to go forward. I know many laymen and women who have offered great things, their time, resources, including money, and it's hard to get it channeled so we effectively respond.
If I could just say, I think the bishops really right now feel beleaguered, lost, and lacking in direction and power. So I think you're right. But one of the things, Bill, listening to you, that seems to be something that we can and should offer is, can we offer, retreats? Can we offer leadership seminars? Can we offer, concrete things that will allow them to get as the Lord say, come away a while, and get a sense of who they are, what the problems are. And the other thing is the listening heart. They have to learn to listen to their people, not to speak to their people, as we do. When I say that about them, I'm saying it about myself too. So I think that's practical.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all want to move. We all want to move on, and we want action, and I think that's a lot of the frustration. But let's go a little bit deeper, because how does the church change its culture of leadership? How does it change for the better?
Slowly.
Slowly.
Yes.
Slowly.
Slowly. But this may be a new moment as they look at their own fragile experience and their need for others. And it just could be that they would look for help outside of themselves, whether it's for retreats or whether it's for how to organize. When you were talking about that, Bill, for how to work with the diocese, there are so many parts to an archdiocese with different committees that may not know what each other is doing. And if you use a comparable model that you're talking about, but then work with them, say, really, this is how to move forward. I think that it may be a moment that it might be welcome, because they're very well realizing their frailty right now.
I think, Karen, I would start in terms of a new culture in two ways. One, I'd reorganize the seminary system, the diocesan seminaries in the United States. Instead of having them removed in kind of monastic settings, I would propose that the seminarians of the future be educated with laymen and women and other seminarians. So you see it at the North American College in Rome, you see it here, some degree it's at Catholic U and in Chicago. But when our Jesuit scholastics are in classes with laymen and women, and when they're Capuchin candidates for priesthood, will be soon La Salette, I think when you have that kind of experience in education in your formative years, that does change your mindset. A second thing that I think is so important for new leadership is the modeling that goes on in Catholic schools. So teachers and principals and individuals who are part of elementary, secondary, higher ed, if they have the listening heart and if they care about everybody around them, I think that is a model that is effective, which speaks to, Joe, your point earlier about Catholic schools. I'm convinced, so much of the renewal of the church in the United States will be shaped by what happens on the campuses of Catholic colleges, universities, high schools, and elementary schools. That's why they're so important. We need to save them.
I agree with you. And could I share the stats that we got from Washington?
That was powerful.
Father Leahy and I had the great good fortune of being engaged in an ongoing dialogue of presidents and bishops and presidents. And at one of the meetings, a member of the staff of the Catholic Conference, or the Conference of Catholic Bishops, said this, and this is something to really think about. 10% of college-age Catholics go to Catholic colleges and universities. 10%. Those 10% become 40% of the active members of every parish in the country. And they contribute 70% of the money that keeps the church in America running. 10% attend Catholic colleges. They become nearly the majority of those who are parishioners, and they give by far the largest amount of money to the works of charity of the church. So the importance, as Father Leahy and Sister has indicated, the importance of the schools cannot be overestimated. Can't be it's just an extraordinary impact that we have. Now, I want to go back to the listening heart. One of the things that stands in the way of the culture changing is the cultures, eat strategies for breakfast. They're very hard to change. They're very, very difficult to change. And one of the reasons is ownership, which is another way of saying who has power.
Yeah.
And power is, it's exhilarating it's intoxicating, and it just won't let it go. You know, I jokingly, but not always jokingly, say, you can't repeal original sin. You really can't. It has staying power. You know, just talk to anybody who's a human being. You can't repeal original sin. So one of the things that we have to do, and I agree with you, we have to change the culture. But part of the changing of the culture has got to be kind of the examination individually and collectively of conscience about what has ownership and power done to distort what the image of the church can and should be. Bill, it goes exactly to what you're saying about, you know, having seminarians educated with lay people is very important. It's also important to have lay people educated with seminarians. Mm-hmm. Because together, if they all have ownership, that, from the very start, that changes. It can crack somewhat the power of clericalism, which is a terrible snare, delusion, and I would say intoxicating sin, or structure of sin. But you can't repeal original sin. If you find somebody who is free of original sin, you have found Our Lady. She's the only one, all right?
We know.
Not even John the Baptist, you know, is in that category.
As presidents, you're always planning and looking ahead into the future. I mean, you have to. Father Leahy, you've often quoted the verse from Proverbs, where there is no vision, the people perish. What are some effective approaches that the church could adopt that you've adopted?
Oh, well, I would begin.
I would continue. You've been at it 40
I have a longer
years.
time.
I mean,
yeah, right. So,
I mean, think about it, Sister Janet. You've been through a lot.
Twice as much as the two of us.
I think the key word is changing and adapting, and that's not the vision. Makes you make the changes you need to. Come back to the example of the seminary. So if you listened to the number of religious communities that have moved their seminarians into colleges and universities, not in a separate hothouse seminary, and you recognize, but the dioceses have not done that. And I think there's more to that truth that you were both talking about than we realize. But I think to be able to change in response to who the students are, if you want to look at that, and that's essential. The institutions that are still around are doing that and have done that. And it seems to me that one of the greatest needs right now is to meet the student generation where that generation is. And I think of Pope Francis saying that we're really a field hospital. That means taking the message, taking the mission to where the people are. And I think for us in higher education, it is really understanding, listening, and engaging with students with how they see their commitment to faith. And for so many of them, so many of us, it has to do with service and the engagement, particularly that I think this generation has, is even different from others. But the link of that service to gospel mandate does happen sometimes, that the people actually see, because they're encouraged to recognize what are the social teachings of the church. Is that what we're doing when we're giving this service, whether it's alternative spring breaks or whether it's the 50 to 100,000 hours of service that they give. So that to me is meeting this generation where it is, so that this generation begins to make some connections, which they have not had, many of them, to this point, to church and to gospel mandate.
And I think it's critical that we as part of the church, especially in parishes and in apostolic works of the church, so that might be a school, it might be some kind of social center, we got to embark on a great campaign of listening to individuals, asking them, what's influenced you in your life? What bothers you about the church? What would you like to see? And inviting others maybe to come back to the church. But we, one-on-one, in small groups, can have great conversations. Then we got to sift all that, and that's where the decision-making has to come in. I say to many groups, leaders have to provide vision and decisions. We need that fresh vision, and then we have to call out of the leaders of the church not just bishops, but laymen and women, clerics, priests, decisions. We have to say, as I said to a group yesterday, we got to get the fleet out of the harbor. It's rusting at the dock. Let's break out to the open sea, put out the nets, and go forward.
Yeah, I agree. Now, one of the things that I think we have to be honest and ask ourselves the question, do we want to preserve the church, or do we want to make God available to the world? I think if we ask the second question, the first is answered. But if we go with the first question first, then we've lost it. So I want to go back to what both of my colleagues have said. The sister talks about, there is a discovery of spiritual strength and a religious moment in service. We should learn something about that. And in the listening to the people, I think we have to, and I said this to the Cardinal Secretary of State, who was it? It was a de Lubac, the church is the sacrament of the encounter with God. We have to make it clear that the church exists not for herself, but the church exists to make God available. And so we have to listen. Where do you find God? How do you find God? How do we learn, to listen and make decisions on what we're going to do in terms of our culture, the culture of the church, as it serves to make the encounter with God possible, captivating, illuminating, compelling, life-changing, and life-enriching. I mean, that's the center of it all. I also think, I would love to go into a parish and take, all of Lent and go through the 5 points that Cardinal Bergoglio made at the pre-conclave gathering of the cardinals before his election 6 years ago. I'm sure all of you have read those. If you have a device, just hit your device, Bergoglio conclave observations. And he captured a lot of the stuff that we were talking about at dinner and here, about the danger of a self-referential church, forgetting that the church exists for God and the people, not the other way around. I would love to do a Lent on those 5 statements, because Bill says they are what we've been talking about. So that's what I would say. I listen very carefully to the wisdom of my colleagues. Very important.
You're so humble, Joe.
I'm a New Yorker. I have no humility at all. I don't even know how to spell it, for God's sake.
Well, it's interesting as university presidents, too. I mean, you're doing strategic plans. You're looking ahead. I mean, can you see the church doing that? Are they ready to do that?
Do I think the church is ready to do that? I'd say not really ready to engage in the process leading to results. I think we have a lot of half-hearted efforts at renewal. We'll do things in parishes, but just look at the data, the attendance at Mass or marriages taking place in the church. Where's the deposit of faith alive, and how do we nourish that? So I think too many parts of the church are, as one veteran priest here in the Archdiocese said years ago, we're playing too much defense. We need to get out with a fresh message, talk about the roots of our faith, be excited, share it, and go forth.
Right. I'm going to build on something. One of the sad things I think about the life of the church right now is the 3 most extraordinary days of the year are the days that have the smallest number of people in the pews. And they are Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday. That's where you get people to encounter, to experience, the full power of, not the church, but the full power of God breaking into human history. It's an advertisement, or it's an underlying of what Bill was just saying. It's important to give them the experience, to invite them into almost an unvarnished experience of God's love for them. That's what we're about. And sometimes that's lost. We're doing not only defenses, we're also worried more about the ceiling than we are about the heart. And I worry about the ceiling a lot, let me be honest with you.
Yeah. Let's talk about the future of our church, which is young people. Mm-hmm. You're all in the business of engaging young people, and you do it quite well. Can you talk a little bit about student formation on your campuses, on how you are bringing young people along on their spiritual journeys? What's working?
Well, I would say critical to any Catholic college or university is the curriculum.
Yeah.
Does the curriculum engage students in the large questions about the meaning of life, what's important to them, and what is Christianity and Catholicism offering? So they need to be taught basic things, and that's where the curriculum is so important. But then I would say my experience here is it's the relationships and experiences outside the classroom that are equally important. It's what happens in residence halls, it's retreat programs, it's service programs, helping students integrate those experiences. What is it I believe and why? What touches my heart? How have I experienced love in my life? Who is God? They need opportunities to discuss those with others and then ultimately answer the questions themselves. So I really think curriculum is key. I think the humanities are essential.
And it gets students talking. I mean, how many students have said it's awkward to have a God talk or to talk about God? But opening up their minds and hearts to that is so important because it gets them started.
It's why, to me, this sense of community that is essential and is certainly very, very aware of it on Catholic college campuses is central to their understanding of who they are and how that links to the program. You know, what links are they making to their courses in theology and philosophy that they're really experiencing, not in the classroom, but outside where it's reinforced, whether it's in a retreat. I think one of my concerns is how many people avail themselves of that opportunity. And they come away saying, this is an amazing, we have a strong sense of community, we're together, we learn this way. But I think there's more that can be done there. And to listen carefully, you started talking about the importance of listening. And that is the only way we're going to get the church, it seems to me, as we know it today, to move forward without fear. And I think the students already have a grasp of that. And we can actually learn so much from them in terms of how they come together and what they want to do. They amaze me over and over with what they see and what they're ready to move with. That's the future.
At Fordham, one of the things, I can say that word here, right?
Yes.
At Fordham,
Absolutely.
we have a core curriculum, as BC does, as Emmanuel does as well. I have learned over the years, and all the time I've been at Fordham in one capacity or the other, every freshman hates the core, hates it. How dare you tell me what I have to learn? I'm an adult agent. Okay. Every freshman hates the core, every senior appreciates it, and every graduate brags about it. Because it opens their minds in a structured way and plants questions or the seeds of questions which are very, very important. So I'm underscoring what Bill and others have said. The curriculum is very important. And at a Jesuit institution, oddly enough, philosophy is really the center because it teaches you how to think, not what to think. It equips you for life. This first. Second, I think, Jesuit schools, and I suspect the same is true with Notre Dame schools, we have a vocabulary that we use, which students, at first bridle against and then they adopt. And they adopt it with great enthusiasm. They talk about cura personalis, and they talk about the search for the magis, and they talk about, community and the values of Jesuit education. We want to be men and women for others. We want to be men and women of compassion, conscience, competence, and deep commitment to the cause of the human family. The language that we give them seeps into them. It owns them as much as they own it. They identify with it. We have to run with that. That's the second. So I would say that's one of the things you do. The third, let's be honest, Catholic higher education is an act of faith and the power of faith to work itself out over time. We have to be patient and understand we plant seeds. We structure knowledge and the way in which people can engage the world. But then you have to sit back and you have faith in the power of faith to work itself out. My last point, let me be clearer on this, and we talked about this at dinner. One of the things that we find very interesting is that graduates of Jesuit colleges and universities, when they get out into the world, they will do a number of things which are interesting to us. One, they will seek out a Jesuit parish. If you live in New York, the parish where adult Catholics, young adult Catholics, get-together on Sundays is St. Ignatius on Park Avenue. It's a mission church, very poor area. Park Avenue, a block away from the Metropolitan Museum. You get the meaning. Here in Chestnut Hill, I would imagine it's St. Ignatius. And all over the country, it'd be the same. Why? They want to go where they were fed to begin with, where they became adult believers. And they want to have that same experience again, and they want to grow in it. They will also seek out retreat opportunities, and they will become, this is where the act of faith and the power of faith is justified. These become the leaders as well as the people who fill the pews. And they'll be the people who will be colleagues. And this is something I think, that we didn't say it, but they become companions with the Lord and colleagues with priests and religious in bringing a new church to birth. And that's an important thing. And we do talk about being companions, breaking bread with the Lord. And so those are the things I would throw out.
It's a wonderful thing that universities can do to light that fire in hearts of young people so that when they do graduate, they are seeking out the right parish and they are trying to continue to grow their faith. And that's definitely a gift of a Catholic university. But I'm also thinking, too, about your campus ministries and some of the model programs that parishes could adopt. I'm just trying to always direct this back to how we can help the church, like the best practices of what you're doing. How can we bring them into the parish? And I know here at Boston College with the School of Theology and Ministry, we're graduating so many young people that are going out into the parishes and they're taking the ideas that they've learned, during their time here. But any thoughts on that?
Well, before we get to that, I want to highlight the importance of older Catholics with younger Catholics. I have been struck by the number of recent grads or current students at Boston College who love to talk to their grandparents. And I know of individuals who don't necessarily, these are college-age students or recent grads, who don't necessarily go to Mass during the year, but on the summer when they're visiting their grandparents, they love to go to church with their grandparents, partly because they have brunch afterwards. But it's that conversation with the grandparents have a sense of faith and tradition, and they have memories. And memories are just critical to handing on a culture. So those of you who are grandparents or aunts and uncles, you have a big role to play along with parents in handing on the faith because you have a lived experience. And I think young people want to know, why is it that you believe? How have you handled difficult moments in life? And those conversations over brunch or being at Mass, doing something together, invaluable.
I would confirm that all the way. And we see it with the current students, with newer students, with older alumni as well. But also it's their grandparents that have the best grasp of the faith, because it doesn't always, sometimes it's skipped to the next generation. And so the students do go to talk to their grandparents, more so than I realized. And it's the grandparents who come to see them at all their events. And I just think that is a significant role.
So maybe we ought to make them all the grandparents
parents
having
in the
made
world.
adjunct faculty of our institution.
At least campus ministry. I want to, one of the things that all young people do have, at least at Fordham, and I know at your schools as well, they have a nose that can smell a phony a million miles away. Yeah. Grandparents, they see an absolutely natural, celebratory, and serene faith lived out day by day. Right. And they will sometimes ask grandparents, why are you people of faith? And the answer is not, why am I a person of faith? Let me tell you about an experience. Yeah. A critical experience in a person's life, on the relationship between the grandparents. This carries enormous weight because they have the radar that allows them to know whether or not you're telling the truth. And that's an extraordinary gift. The other thing, that you mentioned it at dinner, sister, what students who will say, I'm just spiritual, not religious, the strength of the culture, the residual culture, shows itself at times of great crisis, personal crisis or university crisis. I can tell you this, there were no non-believers in New York on September 11th. There were none, absolutely none. And there are no non-believers in a class that has lost a classmate. You know, there is this understanding, which they learned from, I think, their elders, which is very powerful. And we should learn from that. That's one of the moments, one of the resources that we have is this powerful, maybe, fading, but it's still powerful. And we should learn, from that. What can we learn about how the faith acts, how it serves as an empowering tool, a consolation, and just a way in which, someone comes face to face with the power of God at times that, what do we used to call them? Liminal moments.
Yeah.
Liminal moments.
Only the philosophers would know what that is.
Right. Liminal moments, right? When you're at the boundaries and the peripheries and so on. These are the moments where who we are becomes most apparent to us and where our needs are most apparent.
You talk about grandparents modeling their faith. That's really what it's about, models. Can I go back to the question about your campus ministries and maybe some good models that your universities have started or adopted that the church could use moving forward?
I would say, in my experience, find a shameless Francis Xavier figure who will go around the dorms on an opening weekend while the parents are there, say to the kids, we had this happen at Fordham, which was great. We had a Jesuit, not Irish, an Italian-American, who went around and offered to bless every room, and with the parents and the kids there. This was a kid who would cook, dinners. He would be with the kids, and he had, young women who were his colleagues, and they would do the same. What you need are people who are in love with God, who have an experience of God in their lives, and who are enthusiastic and pretty unashamed, utterly shameless about being forthright about it, and sometimes pushy.
And then you need to clone them.
Yeah, but again, the kids can tell whether it's is real or not.
Yeah, right.
And when I was a kid, it was the nuns who did this. They were shameless Pied Pipers, and they got everybody to do things. They brought out the joy as well as the great strength of faith by the way they lived. That's what I would say.
Okay.
And I think there are programs that can be transferred from a college campus to a parish setting or to a wider audience of the church. I'm thinking not just of weekend retreats, but I'm thinking of helping people learn how to pray in different ways and understand the Eucharist better. We're a Eucharistic church. People need to know more about what that element is in the heart of faith. And then I think in classrooms, you started us tonight with a prayer. I think that's a great thing. I think sometimes we're afraid to pray in explicit ways. And it's part of who we are. What's that relationship with God? Prayer is that conversation. People do it differently. But helping students understand, and everybody understand, God is there. We need to let him find us. And that means being quiet sometimes, being open, being in his presence.
One of the initiatives this Lent for my campus ministry, which is very oriented to service, but this time they said, Tuesdays and Thursdays, we hope you will make use of the chapel for time for quiet and prayer. And so it's real encouraging of students to do that. So it's very acceptable. It becomes, oh, this is a Tuesday, this is a Thursday, to get it started. It seems to me, too, that when you talk about prayer, the prayer that everyone knows is the Hail Mary. No matter whether they've been to church in 15 years or whether, and that is what the younger generation is familiar with. And I think talking with them about prayer, we quote the Pope Francis to them, who calls everyone to have a personal encounter with Jesus and to do it unfailingly every day. That's in Joy of the Gospel and several other places. So we say that to students, and then the Busy Person's Retreat and so on, to help people come to know what that means, what prayer is, and students begin to ask questions more and more.
One thing, I agree with everything that has been said. One thing that's it's a humbling realization, but one that I think we have to embrace and live with, is that we have to understand that one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah.
And we have to find those ways of piety and religiosity which work for different students. In days gone by, we would say, well, there are different ethnic expressions of the faith. Mm-hmm. Thanks be to God. An Italian Catholic encounters God and celebrates God in a different way than an Irish Catholic would, or a Polish Catholic would. In this generation, we have to find out what are those very different but very rich expressions of piety that allow students from different backgrounds to celebrate God in their lives, or to even speak of God in their lives. And we have to find out what they are and how we can encourage and support students in that, in the very, very different ways that they encounter God. And the Eucharistic encounter. I think that sometimes we assume too much about the understanding that people have of the Eucharist, how, what it is and how we should enter into it. So I want to underscore what Bill had said about that. Eucharist expression, there should be catechesis, I guess, as part of what we do
I agree.
in the pastoral life. And the last thing, Bill, you'll remember Bob Daly, who taught us confession. I'd love to have, kind of an updated catechesis about reconciliation and confession, which is not the sacrament where you learn how bad people are, but how good they are and how much they want God in their lives and how much God wants them. That's part of what we have to do.
And I think parishes are doing a much better job at that, too, so that young people aren't afraid of that sacrament. They invite it. I've definitely noticed a big change over the years. At our Catholic press event a couple of weeks ago, Father Matt Malone said, this is the time. This is the time for ideas, for people to go into their parishes and say, I have an idea, let's try it. So with darkness, there's light, but now there's opportunity. So if you have an idea, go to your parish and say, let's give this a shot and see if it can work. Where maybe 3 years ago, 1 year ago, would say, no, we can't do it. But now they're open. There's an openness because there has to be an openness. We have to move forward.
And one last thing from my point of view, I'd encourage you both to think of this. We did something at Fordham twice, which was, it was a stretch the first time, and it was a greater stretch the second time. We invited 6 different bishops or cardinals, archbishops, to come and preach to our students in the course of, a semester at the student mass on Sunday. We were delighted that the students came in very large numbers, and not a single bishop came unprepared.
Wow.
And each one of them was engaging, smart, witty, challenging, and the students talked about it. And I can't recommend it highly enough. I can't encourage it strongly enough to even think of it. And not surprisingly, one of the big stars was Cardinal O'Malley. But we brought in people from the West Coast, the East Coast, North, South, and they just, the kids couldn't get enough of the experience. It gave them a wider, broader view of what the church was and who the church is and different ways that God is encountered. We had Wilton Gregory as well. He was, for the kids, he was jaw-dropping, eye-opening, spectacular. And Sean O'Malley was by turns hilarious and very serious, and the kids couldn't believe that he could do both at the same time. So I throw that out as something that really worked for us.
Before we move to questions from the audience, could I just ask the three of you quickly, 30 seconds, what's your hope to share for the church?
The core of the church remains healthy. It's up to us to make it even better and stronger.
Oh, that was less than 30 seconds.
Brevity is best.
My hope is that the passion that many in different generations have had will somehow be caught and transformed by the current generation of students and students in recent grads, so that the spark continues, that's there, but is sometimes quiet.
Paul VI was asked what he wanted the church to be remembered for during his pontificate. And he said, I want it to be said that at this moment in her life, the church loved.
Beautiful.
So I want the church to have such transparent love of the Lord that the Lord is known, experienced, loved, and served in the church at this time.
Great.
And that as we do that, we remember the words of Luke 18:1, pray and not lose heart.
Yes.
Amen. So our Associate Director, Elise Urenick, has sorted through some of the cards, and she's just going to kind of do a round robin of questions. So Elise?
Sure. Thank you. They're not directed to anyone in particular. You're all free and encouraged
Sister, you're up.
to respond.
Thank you.
Catholic universities and colleges are both businesses and organizations with a Catholic mission. What can higher ed teach the church about how to balance its multiple responsibilities, priorities, and areas of oversight?
I think we've touched on a number of those examples tonight, and some of it does have to do with the very running an organization is, actually there are programs now to give people master's degrees in how to help the church run the organization of the church in the different parishes. And I think that is something, and it's coming out of Villanova or some other places. So I think that there's much that can be taught about engaging people, listening, and at the same time having, as we talked about, whether it's task groups or committees, at the parish level or even at other regional levels. That's one thing.
Yeah, I agree. You know, there are programs in leadership and organizational skills, all of that. I think what might be good would be for the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities to sit down with the bishops and say to them, or not just bishops, but can I talk about this? We have the Catholic Health and Hospital Association. We have all these professional associations, and we could say to them, what are your specific needs for leadership, for inculcation of charism, for the development of new ways of apostolic vitality, and therefore make sure we have the country covered. Right now, it's Villanova does some, BC does some, we do some things, Notre Dame does some things in the center of the country, and then there's no. Look, one of the things that we have going for us is great variation. One of the biggest problems we have is great variation. We have to have some sort of organizational outreach and consistency and quality control about what it is that we're offering. That's what I would say.
And I would add, I'd go back to governance.
Yeah.
I think what has stymied a lot of the renewal in the church at the upper levels of dioceses and archdioceses is things get clogged up because the decision-making process is too tight and nobody follows through. So a lot of data may come in. But if you could say a diocese or an archdiocese has a lay board of trustees that's working with the bishop and the archbishop, and there are committees that are responsible, held to get things done, I think you'd see many good things happening.
Thank you. The next question from the audience: how can young people take ownership in the church with clericalism so strong?
Well, I'm not
Or
sure
can
clericalism. I'm not. I would question the supposition that clericalism is so strong. I don't think that's the case. I think there's a lot of rhetoric about that, but the declining numbers of priests say laity have to have a higher role or greater role. And if I look at a Boston College or a Fordham or Emmanuel, we religious are not dominating those institutions. It's lay people that have been empowered. It took us a long time to figure out how to do that. So I think the myth is there's this great clericalism. I question that.
One way or the other, though, I think the question really is, how do we empower young Catholics in the church? I think we empower them by first engaging them. To engage them, you have to take them seriously, and I think all of our institutions do. And then there is the art and the art and vocation of the question and the invitation. I think there are a lot of young Catholics who love the Lord. Let me start with that. I'm not going to say they love the church. They love the Lord, and the Lord has sought them out, and therefore they love the church. But no one has asked them, have you thought about kind of leading? And if he or she says, well, I want to get married, you say, so what? that's a great vocation. And in that vocation, the art of the question is a very important one. It's an invitation to assume leadership and ownership. And I think that's one of the things that we have to learn to do. And I think in institutions, around the country that has been learned. But we have to, and we learn this in vocational work too. We have young men on our campuses, they graduate and they're 5 years out and they're still not married. And I always do, this is a very strange thing I do when I'm at reunions, 5 years and 10 years. They say, I want the hand check. And if there's no ring, I say, what the heck is wrong with you? What's going on here? And sometimes they'll say, no one ever asked me.
Yeah.
No one ever asked me if I'd be a priest. And therefore I didn't think I had it. So also in lay leadership, no one asked me. I didn't think I had it. I think we have to get to that point in a big way.
The power of invitation.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we're noticing, and deliberately, is the engagement of the students with the ministries of the religious community, so that they feel very free to invite every sister in the Northeast to come to an event at Emmanuel, which they have done, and there'll be an amazing turnout because they want to know what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they can be part of it. And they are part of some of it. This is an initiative right from the students. We have a group of students that focuses on the charism of the founding order. It's called the 1804 Society, and they attend every event we have to participate in it, but they also want to learn from what's going on right now, not from the people who are already at the college, but from those who are in different ministries. That's another way that's the outreach to the students.
Thank you. Our final question. Every crisis can also be seen as an opportunity. What is the church's opportunity today?
What was the first 2 words? Every what?
All right. Every crisis can also be seen as an opportunity. What is the church's opportunity today?
I think it's to be rediscovered by Christ and to rediscover Christ. To get back to the core, Father Leahy talked about this. The core of the faith is the encounter with God, and I think the crisis is inviting us, I think, to strip away those things which are not essential, to get back to the core, and the core is the encounter. That takes a lot of courage. It takes hard work. It takes discernment. It takes the courage to realize that you yourself really need. The benefit of the church is, one soul left wandering alone is at a disadvantage. But an ecclesial body gives strength, wisdom, and direction. And in that ecclesial body, I think it takes courage to admit that we need that. But in that, to rediscover what the core is, to allow ourselves to be set on fire by the encounter with God, and the world will be transformed. It started with 12, and the gospel, and it has been the church has been a force for good, but it mostly and primarily, and I always think of Bill Leahy when I say this, it has made God available in compellingly attractive, life-changing ways. So I think this is what the crisis gives us the opportunity to do, is to return to that and allow ourselves, and we can't think of ourselves as virtuous because we're searching for God. But we can think of ourselves as rather fortunate that God sought us out and we finally woke up and allowed ourselves to go search back. So that's the thing I would say.
It seems to me that one of the gifts that we have today is the gift of Pope Francis and his writings that are so attractive to all, but particularly to young people, whether it's Laudato Si, that they certainly have taken to heart, but also that call to prayer and to relationship with Jesus that's clearly can be referenced, and students can identify with that. But the gap is a time to move in and to see how this can work, not in the ways we've been trying in the past, but in new ways with the centrality of the church.
And I would add, it seems to me the possibility of change is greater now than ever, because so much of the previous superstructure or system is collapsing. And so out of that, when you see parishes needing renewal, I think it's easier to get heard. Or when you're thinking about the whole United States and the needs, Janet talked about immigration at the beginning. There are so many ways in which people can serve now. And I think of our School of Theology and Ministry, many young people who are getting degrees there did a year or two of service after college. They want to get prepared for leadership. I think they're going to have great opportunities. We have to figure out how we're going to pay them for the work. But never have we had more wealth than we have today in the Catholic community in the United States. So what we need is ideas and vision and commitment. There's less of the resistance than I think there was 25, 30 years ago. I think the leadership, I'm thinking of bishops and archbishops, I think someone used the word beleaguered. They're beleaguered, they're tired. If they'll only help us. So we got to reach out and say,
We'll help you.
give us the chance to engage with you. We'll walk together and we'll be better for that. So different times, more opportunities, I think. Painful at times to see the cost of the last 10 years and 25 years, 50 years.
I agree. I would throw in one other thing. The second largest religious group in the United States after Catholics is former Catholics. So I think that one of the things that we should not despair of is the possibility of re-evangelizing.
Yeah.
You know, people who were brought up in the faith and for whom the faith was a defining element of their lives. We have to, go back in with a listening heart, ask, what is it that led you astray? Or not, that's a terrible way to put it. Why did you not come back? Or why did you walk? And begin maybe to walk with them again. And learn from them what it is that the church can and should do to be more compellingly attractive in its life and its presentation. The church, in many ways in the first centuries, was triumphant, terrible word to use, because the gospel was lived with freshness, with conviction, with joy, and with seriousness. It's a great mixture. So what can we learn from those who have, walked away from the church? In the old days, we'd say they were fallen away Catholics. What can we learn from their experience that will enable us to re-engage a culture across generations? The emphasis has to be on the young, to be sure. The young are the future. But at the same time, we can learn, what is it about the church's recent past that so alienated people? And there's a strange thing here, and I know this is going to sound Jesuitical, but I am a Jesuit. Father Sosa has said we have to stop railing against secularism. We have to stop railing against a kind of a tepid unbelief, because we have to read the signs of the times, and perhaps those are the signs of the times. And we have to read the gospel in the light of that and learn how the gospel has to be presented in light of those things. So no more railing, but listening heart even to the critic. It's like if you've ever read Gaudium et Spes, and I know you all have. I know it's your bedside reading.
Beautiful.
It's on your tables. I've been to your rooms when you don't know I'm there. Gaudium et Spes takes the critics of the church so seriously that I jokingly, last week when I was talking to a group of Knights of Malta, let me tell you, Knights of Malta, but I said there's a section of Gaudium et Spes that almost reads like, take an atheist to lunch and listen carefully to what it is that she or he is saying about how, not about how, why is it that the message of God doesn't get through? Rather than seeing this person as hating God, why is it that the message of God is not getting through? What is the criticism? And the criticism frequently of the church from an atheist is, I have the gospel here and I have you here. More precisely, I have the gospel here and you here. So I think conversations with people who have walked away from the church will help us to understand that and be better evangelists in an age that, let's be honest, is hungry and frightened. And not just politically so. So those are...
I wonder about the nuns, NONES, is that is the second largest group in the country. And when you talk about evangelization, and again, you look at the messages coming from Rome on that, from the Pope in terms of the recent writings, but the reality of engaging with some of those people who say that they're there, and the importance of that group to the life of the church in this country, certainly. But the fact that it is a group, and they're now being recognized, they're actually meeting with other people called NUNS, been articles on that. And so I think that is a key area for evangelizing. How many articles do we see about why I left the church, why I returned, why I left the church and stayed leaving it? And I think that is a conversation that is happening on campuses and perhaps in parishes as well, and that could lead a clue to what we need to be doing right now.
You know,
Well,
it's
I have one last word about something that is important that Sister brought up earlier, and I want to make it clear this is not a nuns, N-U-N-S apostrophe issue. Bill and I readily acknowledged, and I suspect most of the men and women of a certain age would acknowledge, that a large part of the formative influence of the church that we had was from the feminine side of the church, that is, say, from religious women. Priests would say Mass and they would preach. Sometimes they would preach beautifully, sometimes not so well. But my experience was nuns taught spectacularly every day. And I mean that. We had great nuns in my grammar school. And so we had a balanced experience of God working through his church. Yeah. One of the challenges I think the church has now is that not only are there no women who are ordained, we no longer have the experience, our young people don't have the experience of a balanced church where the women were formidable and wise, I would say formation agents in the faith and in church and in life. We just don't have that now. And so, I'm just saying that the loss of religious life for women in the United States creates almost an urgency to look at what must the role of women be now in new forms, since that form, which was kind of canonically acknowledged as a major part, a full coordinated part of the church, is no longer there. So, I want to underscore that. It's a very important thing for us to realize, and not to engage the question in a frightened way, or saying, oh, well, doctrinally, look, our experience, and I suspect your experience was growing up very balanced. You had the nuns and you had the priests and the brothers. And it was a church that had, I think, credibility because both were involved. My name is William Leahy when you report to the press. And to the bishops.
Thank you, Father McShane. So as our conversation draws to a close, I just want to remind everyone that we are mining these conversations for ideas. Our next magazine is Revitalizing Our Church. It's going to go to press the end of May. If this conversation was a catalyst for an idea that you had, send it to us, church21@bc.edu. Also, we have 2 more programs to come. One is April 29th, and that's actually professors, ideas from professors in the pews. It's with Professor Kristen Heyer, Professor Mike Pratt, who I see here, wave Mike, and Professor Kristen, there she is in back, yay, and Professor Hassman Espino. Not only are they grace in the classroom, but they are so committed to their parishes, so that should be a great conversation. And our last program in the Easter series is ideas from lay business leaders, and we'll have Jack Connors, Chuck Clow, and Denise Morrison with us, and that is on May 6th, so mark your calendar. How can we ever thank you for all that you have done for the church and for Catholic higher education? I mean, amazing. We pray for you. We pray for wisdom. We pray for your health. We pray for your continued leadership, knowing how much we need you and how much we value you. And thank you to everyone that took the time to come out tonight, because we all need each other and we need our church. So thank you for coming. The video will be up on our website in the next week. That's bc.edu/C21. And look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.